So Berimbolo is a very complex position that I feel that most people have a hard time doing and understanding what's happening. But I'm a big fan of making the complex things simple. And I feel that the best way of doing it is understanding our goal, what we want to get, as opposed to following some steps, okay? Because two things, if you really understand it, it will be hard for you to forget what you're doing. But if you follow some steps, you always forget it. And also because when some things don't go according to plan, what happens all the time in Jiu-Jitsu, if you understand the position instead of just reminding the steps, you'll be able to adapt. Okay, so in this video I want you to just understand what's happening in the Berimbolo. Okay, not doing the technique, okay, but what's happening in the movement. Okay, so in Berimbolo we have 4 steps. First we have the inversion. Second, we're going to lift his hips. Third, getting the connection to the hips, getting his hip on top of mine, and then fourth, getting my head above his. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to show what the steps are, and then I'm going to explain them. So I'm going to start in double guard pull. I'm going to get a heel, and I'm going to get the pants. Okay, so first I'm going to get the inversion, step number 1. Step number 2, I'm going to lift his hips. Number 4, I'm going to connect his hips to mine. I'm going to get his hips on top of mine. Now, this is step number 3. Step number 4, I have to get my head above his. Okay? So, let's start from the beginning. I'm not going to go deep into the inversion, okay, because I don't think people have a hard time understanding what's happening here. But then from now on, I think that's where the problem is. Okay? So, I'm just going to invert. I'm going to get butt grip and then the heel from the La Hiva. Okay, I'm going to invert. Perfect. Okay, so now step number 1 is done. Let's go straight to step number 2. So step number 2 is lifting his hips. Okay, so in Berimbolo I want to get his back, but his back is on the mat, so there's no way I can do a back take from here. I have to lift his hips so I can connect my chest to his back. So what I want to do in Berimbolo is I want to get a stack. I want to get his feet above his head, so I lift his hips, and now his back is exposed. I can start taking the back. Okay, so this is step number 2. So how am I going to get it? The most common mistake here is people just see the movement more or less, and they throw their heels in a straight line. So they just go here. What happens now is they get the opponent's leg on the mat, but now his hip is still on the mat and the back also. So there's no way I can get a back kick from here. So what I have to do to lift his hips is, when I'm inverted, I'm going to step near his shoulder with my feet. Okay, so my feet, instead of going in a straight line, they're going to go near the shoulder. Now, very important also is my knees. So I have to step near the shoulder and my knees have to point up. If my knees are pointing sideways, once again, his hip stays on the mat. But if I point my knees up, what happens is I have to get my knee in between his thigh and his stomach, okay? And now this foot will hang up in the air because of the resistance of his leg. But now if I push this heel towards the mat, what happens is I'm going to lift his hip, okay? So this is step number 2. Getting the hip off the mat. What happens now is, now I can see his back. I can start working the back take. So after I lift his hip, now I can start working on step number 3. Is I want to pull his hip on top of mine to get the full hip connection. Because this is, I think this is the second most common mistake, is when people are able to lift the opponent's hips, now they want to get the back right away. So what happens is, there's some space here still. So if I want to get the back right away, his hip will go back on the mat, he will slide his shoulders, and now once again, I'll have to come up probably to side control. So what I want to do here, so once more I get the inversion, knee in, step near the shoulder, knees pointing to the ceiling. I'm going to force my heel towards the mat. So hip is up. What I want to do here is I want to pull his hip on top of mine, so I'm going to do this by opening my knees outwards, and I'm going to get my hip in, so here. I will also help, of course, with my hand, okay? So, boom, here. Now, if he wants to get his back on the mat, try to get the back on the mat, it'll be really hard. So, at this point, it's really hard to defend the back take, okay? So, step number 3 is done. Now, we just have step number 4. So step number 4 is I have to get my head above his head. So how will I do this? So this will take 2 small steps. So now I'm going to switch my legs, okay? Because if I just leave this leg inside, he can just pull my leg, and then it will be really hard for me to get my head above his. So I'm just going to switch my hooks. I'm going to take my left leg out, and I'm going to put my right leg out too. So I'm just going to switch. Now this is very important, is I'm just going to do a small hip escape, because now I'm already on the back, but if I just try to get the seatbelt from here, he can just slide his shoulders, and then once again he will escape and I'll have to go to side control. But after I switch my hooks, what happens here, I'm just going to tap the mat, and I'm going to escape my hip high a little bit. I'm going to escape my hip a little bit so my head can get high. Now if he tries to slide his shoulders, it will be really hard because I can already get the seatbelt, and now I can start working on the hooks or on the choke. Okay, so I'm just going to go one more time from another angle. So I'm not going to go deep into the inversions, so I'm just going to invert. Step number 1. Step number 2, I'm going to lift his hips. So I'm going to step on the mat near the shoulder and knees pointing up. So I cannot stress this enough. It's really important that this knee has to be in between his thigh and his stomach. If I leave my knee out and I do the same thing, hip is not lifting, okay? So this knee will have to go here, okay? So on the mat and knee between his stomach and his thigh. Now when I push this leg on the mat, that's when his hip comes up, okay? So I'm going to get a hip connection. I want to put his hip on top of mine, switch the hooks, escape my hip a little bit so my head will get higher than his. Now I can get a good seatbelt and start attacking the back or the choke, okay? So keep in mind that there's a lot of ways of doing the berimbolo. There's a lot of ways of inverting, of lifting the hip, of getting the hip connection and getting the head higher than your opponent's, okay? But the steps will always be the same, okay? And very important is to keep in mind the order of the steps. So, okay, so in this video I just want you to understand how the berimbolo works. Maybe in the future I'll do a video explaining more details about the berimbolo, but this is the main mechanics. Okay, I hope this helped you guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Oops.